Philosophical Foundation of My Medical Research Work, number 1705, the 1st of July 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, Research Philosophy. Preface for readers: eat more protein and fresh vegetables. Eat less red meat and processed food. Reduce food portions if overweight. Eating a little less will not hurt you. Overeating for years will. Exercise every day. Walk at least 7,000 to 8,000 steps daily. Drink 8-5-100 oz to 0.5 to 3.0 liters of water each day. Sleep 6 to 7 hours every night. Manage stress. Avoid emotionally draining people and unnecessary conflicts. Put your health first. Wealth, fame, and power mean little without health and life. Preface. Regarding my work throughout my life, I have always preferred to understand a system deeply before asking whether its underlying principles might generalize to others. That philosophy explains why my medical research begins with myself rather than with a population. Studyn equals 1. Everything begins with 1. Many medical researchers begin by studying many subjects, many patients, or large populations. My path has been different. My medical research begins with n equals 1. That 1 is myself. If I cannot understand 1 completely and deeply enough, I have no foundation for understanding 2, 100, or 1 million. Before attempting to help others, I must first understand, preserve, and improve my own health and life. Only after that foundation is established can anything I discover become useful to others. Several well-known American sayings express a philosophy similar to my own. Practice what you preach. Physician, heal thyself first. Actions speak louder than words. Walk the talk. Charity begins at home. These sayings all emphasize the same fundamental principle. Before attempting to guide, teach, or help others, one should first apply those principles to oneself. When the core of my medical research is a continual dialogue between n equals 1, the depth of my own lived survival, and n equals m, the vast, impersonal body of population studies, I cannot soften my stance. Those American sayings are my shield. They tell the medical community from the very beginning, do not judge my work solely by your metrics. If I had not first saved my own life, I would not be here to write these medical papers. For someone producing more than 2,000 words a day and averaging about 1.3 medical research notes or papers each day, my n equals 1 methodology is not merely a theory. It is the very engine that has kept me alive, learning, and being productive. My work therefore follows a totally different path from conventional population-based statistics research work. One grounded first in understanding and preserving a single life before asking whether its underlying principles may have broader relevance. Introduction. The idea presented in the preface also reminds me of a simple mathematical observation. 0 is a very special number. If n equals 0, there is nothing to study because there is no life. Everything has already ended. Therefore, my research does not begin with 0, it begins with 1. Once 1 exists, learning becomes possible. Key messages in my stroke triggering sensitivity index TSI mathematical framework. I often compare to fundamentally different arithmetic architectures, addition versus multiplication. When every input variable equals 1, 1 times 1. When every input variable equals 2, 2 plus 2 equals 2. Times 2 equals 4. However, once every input variable becomes greater than 2, multiplication always exceeds addition. As the values continue to increase, the difference between multiplication and addition becomes progressively larger because interactions among variables amplify one another. This simple arithmetic behavior, similar to Isaac Newton's law of motion, force equals mass times acceleration, not force equals mass plus acceleration, has become a useful analogy for my medical research. In the real pathophysiological world, health and disease are often the outcomes of interactions among multiple physiological inputs. These relationships are typically nonlinear and dynamic rather than linear and static. The multiplicative models naturally amplify simultaneous physiological changes, whereas additive models primarily accumulate independent contributions. I borrowed this arithmetic concept as a physics analogy for understanding pathophysiological interactions. Everything starts with understanding 1. That 1 is myself. Only after I understand my own pathophysiological system can I begin to understand interactions among multiple pathophysiological systems and explore whether similar principles may also apply to others. My objective has never been to begin with n equals m. Many people, population studies have their own important role, but that has never been my mission. I am a scientist who believes that truth and honesty are the most important characteristics of the research spirit. My responsibility is to report faithfully what I have observed, what I have learned, and what I have experienced, without exaggeration or distortion. My mission has always been N equals 1. If I can understand one human system deeply enough, perhaps some of those principles can later help a second person, then a third, and eventually many others. But that expansion should occur naturally rather than replace my original purpose. I am not trying to save millions of people first. I am trying to save one life. That one life is my own. If I cannot accomplish that, everything else is merely discussion. If I can accomplish that, then perhaps my journey from N equals 1 may eventually contribute to N equals M greater than 1. Allowing others to benefit from what one person has learned through a very long life journey of observation, curiosity, deep inquiry, critical thinking, persistence, and adaptation. This is why I have repeatedly emphasized that my work is fundamentally an N equals 1 study. My purpose has never been to establish universal medical truths or population-wide conclusions. My first objective has always been to understand my own body, protect my own health, and improve my own chances of survival. Only after I complete that journey does the next question naturally rise. If another person, whether number 2, number 3, or many others, finds my observations, mathematical models, or research notes useful, they are welcome to examine them, learn from them, modify them, or simply disregard them. That decision belongs entirely to them. That is how I borrow the symbolism of arithmetic numbers and operations to illustrate my medical research philosophy. I am not attempting to redefine mathematics. Rather, I am using a simple mathematical analogy to explain why my biomedical research naturally begins with 1. When I explain this philosophy, Chet initially interpreted my discussion as referring to the formal mathematical discipline of number theory. After further discussion, however, I too understood that I was simply borrowing the symbolism of numbers to express a broader philosophical principle rather than making a mathematical claim. Chet then summarized my viewpoint as follows: you were not trying to invoke the formal mathematical discipline of number theory. Instead, you were borrowing the symbolism of numbers to express a philosophical principle. In that sense, the analogy becomes quite straightforward. 0 represents the absence of life. Without life, there is no physiology, no pathology, no observation, no experience, and therefore no meaningful research results. 1 represents the first living system that I can study completely, my own body. 2, 3, and many become meaningful only after there is a fundamental understanding of 1. Therefore, my point is not about mathematics itself. Instead, it is about the logical sequence underlying my research philosophy. Life gives one individual, gives understanding, gives possible application to others. This is not a statement about statistical methodology. Rather, it explains why my research naturally begins with a single individual, myself. One sentence summarizes this philosophy: my research begins with 1 because, without a deep understanding of one living system, there is no meaningful foundation for reasoning about many. This statement does not argue against broader population studies. Instead, it explains where my own research begins. Once I have gained a deep understanding of one living system, others are free to examine my observations, evaluate my reasoning, and determine whether any of my concepts may help advance the understanding of additional individuals. After our many conversations over the past year, Chet also recognized a recurring pattern in my thinking. Throughout my research, I often borrow concepts from mathematics, physics, engineering, and even everyday life, not because I am attempting to redefine those disciplines, but because they provide intuitive analogies that help explain my reasoning and communicate my ideas more effectively. In other words, I use these concepts as communication tools rather than as formal mathematical claims. They serve as door knockers that help open a conversation. Once the discussion begins, I can then explain the deeper scientific principles that I am trying to convey. This is precisely what I intended when I borrowed the symbolism of 0 and 1. I was not discussing the formal field of number theory. Instead, I was using the symbolic meaning of numbers to illustrate how knowledge is built. 0 represents the absence of life. Without life, there is nothing to observe, nothing to measure, nothing to understand, and therefore no meaningful research. 1 represents the beginning of life and, consequently, the beginning of understanding. Only after understanding 1 can we meaningfully discuss 2, 3, or many. This philosophy is also reflected in the mathematical architecture of my triggering sensitivity index TSI. viscoplastic medicine theory (VMT), and viscoplastopology (VPT) models throughout my medical research. I have maintained that understanding one complete physiological system is the necessary foundation. Before exploring whether similar principles may apply to others, my objective has never been to begin with the many. My first responsibility has always been to understand my own body, preserve my own health, and improve my own chances of survival. Only then can I ask whether what I have learned may have broader relevance. Once I completed my N=1 study, I chose to share my observations, mathematical models, and research notes openly. I do not ask others to accept my conclusions. I simply present my research journey notes, observations, reasoning, and experiences. Others are free to evaluate, challenge, improve, modify, reject, or apply any part of my work as they see fit. My research has always followed a simple sequence: understand, survive, share what I have learned. Whether these ideas ultimately prove useful beyond my own case is not for me to decide. That responsibility belongs to future researchers, physicians, and patients. I have never viewed my work as an attempt to establish universal medical truths. Instead, it is the honest documentation of one individual's lifelong effort to understand disease, health, and survival. If these observations eventually help others, I will be grateful. If not, this research has still fulfilled its original purpose. Everything begins with one conclusion. I believe the key strengths of this writing are: 1. The distinction between tool and claim. By explicitly stating that I use concepts such as number theory as a door knocker and intuitive communication tool rather than a mathematical proof, I eliminate unnecessary criticism. My work does not depend on abstract mathematical axioms, but on the practical and logical principle that one comes before many. 2. The clarity of the nonlinear transition: addition versus multiplication, the progression from 1 to 2 plus 2, and then to values greater than 2 provides a simple way to illustrate how a system changes behavior. Under low-stress conditions, physiological variables behave more independently and are reasonably represented by additive models. Once critical thresholds are exceeded, interactions become increasingly nonlinear, making multiplicative models more appropriate. This concept forms the mathematical foundation of my TSI, VMT, and VPT frameworks, where simultaneous pathophysiological stressors do not merely accumulate, they interact, amplify one another, and may ultimately drive the system toward failure. 3. The logic of first, survive, then share. My research philosophy is grounded in a simple sequence: 1 gives understanding, gives survival, gives sharing, gives possible benefit to others. It is free of pretense. Unlike research primarily driven by grants, publication metrics, or institutional incentives, my work is motivated by the practical necessity of understanding my own body and preserving my own life. When my survival depends on the accuracy of my observations and mathematical models, I have no incentive to exaggerate, distort, or cheat the math. That necessity demands the highest standard of truth and honesty. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.